the global political landscape has just experienced a seismic shift. After years of escalating tensions that brought the world to the precarious precipice of a major conflict, the United States and Iran have officially entered into a comprehensive de-escalation framework. This diplomatic breakthrough is the result of months of quiet, painstaking back-channel diplomacy conducted in the neutral and discreet grounds of Muscat and Doha. The Biden administration and the Iranian supreme leadership, long-standing and bitter adversaries, have finally agreed to a ceasefire that aims to dismantle the immediate triggers of potential war. This deal, often described by regional insiders as a stop-for-stop agreement, is multifaceted and deeply complex. It demands an immediate freeze on Iran's high-level uranium enrichment and a complete cessation of proxy attacks against American installations and personnel throughout the Middle East. In return, the United States has agreed to ease specific punishing economic sanctions that have long choked the Iranian economy and isolated its people. The geographic scope of this agreement is vast, impacting the bloody front lines of Yemen, the fractured landscapes of Iraq and Syria, and the vital global energy artery of the Strait of Hormuz. For Washington, this is a pragmatic move to finally realize the long-delayed pivot to Asia, allowing the American military to refocus its immense resources on the Indo-Pacific. For Tehran, it is a necessary and urgent gamble for economic survival in an increasingly hostile world. To fully appreciate the magnitude of this ceasefire, we must revisit the dark historical shadow that looms over every modern handshake. For over 4 decades, the relationship between Washington and Tehran has been defined by the wreckage and trauma of the 1979 Islamic Revolution. That pivotal year marked a total inversion of reality, where a key regional ally became a revolutionary foe almost overnight. The ensuing decades were not merely a Cold War, but a complex, multi-dimensional struggle for regional hegemony and ideological dominance. The nuclear question eventually became the centerpiece of this rivalry, sparking fears of a new arms race. While the 2015 Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA, offered a temporary thaw and a glimmer of hope, the 2018 U.S. withdrawal and the subsequent maximum pressure campaign reignited the fires of deep-seated animosity. This period was characterized by a dangerous and unpredictable shadow war, where drones, maritime seizures, and sophisticated cyber attacks became the primary languages of communication. Iran's axis of resistance, a sophisticated network of proxy groups spanning the entire region, became the primary vehicle for challenging American influence and security. This escalation reached a terrifying peak in early 2020 with the targeted strike on General Qasem Soleimani, an event that pushed both nations to the very edge of an open conventional war. The cycle of retaliation that followed proved that neither side could truly win such a conflict without devastating global consequences. Now, in the present day, a new set of harsh realities has forced both players back to the negotiating table. The primary driver is undeniable economic fatigue. Inside Iran, the weight of international sanctions has crippled the real and sparked waves of domestic protests that have shaken the government's sense of absolute security. The leadership in Tehran understands that the status quo is unsustainable if they wish to maintain internal order and historical continuity. On the other side of the Atlantic, the United States is facing its own strategic crossroads. The American military is increasingly eager to reduce its expensive and often counterproductive footprint in the Middle East. With the growing influence of China and the ongoing challenges posed by Russia, the Pentagon's focus has shifted decisively toward the great power competition. There is a growing consensus in Washington that the era of forever wars must end so that resources can be redirected toward the Pacific theater. Furthermore, the volatility of global energy markets, exacerbated by the ongoing war in Ukraine, has made Middle Eastern stability a top priority once again. The need for stable oil prices has created a rare moment where the interests of the American consumer and the Iranian state briefly align. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you are watching from. This convergence of domestic pressure, global energy needs, and shifting strategic priorities has created the first real chance for peace in a generation. The intermediaries in Oman and Qatar have successfully bridged a trust gap that had previously seemed insurmountable, leading to this fragile but historic moment in time. This deal is not merely a pause in gunfire, but a fundamental recalculation of how power is projected across the desert sands. The practical implementation of this ceasefire relies on a delicate mechanism known as the stop-for-stop agreement. On the dusty front lines of Iraq and Syria, this translates to a tangible silence. Iranian-backed militias, which have for years used drone technology and rockets to harass American outposts like Al-Assad Air Base, have been ordered to stand down. This cessation is monitored through direct lines established via intermediaries in Muscat and Doha. In return, the United States has suspended its cycle of retaliatory airstrikes. Simultaneously, the nuclear dimension addresses the most existential threat. Iran has agreed to cap its uranium enrichment at 60%, pausing its march toward weapons-grade capacity. This freeze is under the constant surveillance of the International Atomic Energy Agency. IAEA inspectors now have expanded access to facilities in Natanz, ensuring that the breakout time remains at a manageable distance. To facilitate this, the deal involves the release of billions in frozen Iranian assets. These funds are not a blank check. They are funneled through specialized banking channels in Qatar to be used exclusively for humanitarian purposes, such as food and medicine, addressing the Iranian public's suffering without directly funding military expansion. Back in Washington, this diplomatic maneuver has ignited a firestorm of political debate within the U.S. Congress. Supporters of the Biden administration argue that this ceasefire is the only pragmatic way to prevent a catastrophic regional war that would draw in thousands of American troops. They frame it as a necessary step toward the long-promised strategic pivot to the Indo-Pacific. However, hardline skeptics view the deal as dangerous appeasement, arguing that the release of assets subsidizes a regime that remains a primary source of regional instability. This divide is further complicated by the 2024 election. For the current administration, a stable Middle East is a vital campaign talking point, demonstrating a foreign policy that prioritizes American lives and economic health. Yet, the risk remains high. Any violation by Iranian proxies could be weaponized by political opponents. Amidst this partisan bickering, American public opinion reflects a growing weariness of forever wars. Recent polling suggests that a significant majority of the American electorate is more concerned with domestic infrastructure and the rising cost of living than with maintaining a massive, permanent military presence in the Levant. This domestic pressure provides the administration with a mandate to seek de-escalation, even if the path forward is fraught with political landmines. The immediate ripples of the ceasefire are most visible in the global energy markets and the complex web of regional alliances. As news of the thaw spread, global oil prices stabilized, anticipating the return of more Iranian crude. For the American consumer, this could translate into lower prices at the pump, a critical factor for the domestic economy. However, the reaction from traditional U.S. allies like Israel and Saudi Arabia is characterized by profound skepticism. In Jerusalem, the leadership remains deeply concerned that any deal failing to dismantle Iran's nuclear infrastructure merely delays an inevitable confrontation. Meanwhile, Riyadh is carefully calibrating its own security posture, weighing the benefits of a calmer region against the fear of a resurgent Iran. This regional recalibration is forcing the Pentagon to rethink its resource allocation. The shift from U.S. Central Command to the Pacific is no longer a theoretical goal, but a budgetary reality. Ships and air assets once stationed in the Persian Gulf are being redeployed to counter the influence of China and Russia. Furthermore, the Strait of Hormuz has seen a marked reduction in maritime harassment and tanker seizures. This newfound security is a cornerstone of the agreement, ensuring the global economy remains insulated from regional sabotage. As the stop-for-stop framework takes hold, the world watches to see if this is a lasting peace or a strategic pause before the next geopolitical earthquake shakes the foundations of global stability. The verification of these security guarantees now rests heavily on the shoulders of the IAEA, whose reports will be scrutinized by both sides of the American aisle. As the immediate tensions of the stop-for-stop agreement settle into a new status quo, the broader implications for American grand strategy become clear. For decades, the United States has been tethered to Middle Eastern security, often at the expense of other global priorities. Now, with the ceasefire in place, the Biden administration is attempting to finalize the long-promised geopolitical pivot. This transition is not merely about withdrawing troops. It represents a fundamental reorientation toward the great power competition with China and Russia. By stabilizing its most volatile flank, Washington aims to concentrate its essential diplomatic and military weight in the vast Indo-Pacific, where the future of global trade is likely to be decided. This strategic shift is designed to ensure that American influence remains dominant in the face of rising Eastern powers. Within the United States, the potential for a peace dividend has moved from theoretical debate to a tangible possibility. Resources not spent on maintaining a massive carrier presence in the Persian Gulf or sustaining remote outposts in Syria can be redirected toward domestic needs. The administration's vision involves funneling these funds into infrastructure, high-tech research, and next-generation defense systems. However, this reallocation faces significant hurdles. There is deep-seated skepticism in the U.S. Congress about the permanence of Iranian cooperation. Political critics argue that any reduction in military presence is premature, suggesting that a vacuum will only invite aggression from regional proxies. They maintain that the financial relief provided to Tehran will eventually be weaponized against American interests and security once the spotlight fades, creating a new and more dangerous cycle of violence. The success of this era hinges on whether this ceasefire is a temporary pause or the beginning of a formal diplomatic restoration. Pro-diplomacy advocates argue that engagement is the only sustainable way to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran while protecting American service members. They point to the IAEA's increased monitoring as evidence that fundamental transparency can replace confrontation. Conversely, hardline skeptics remain convinced that the Iranian supreme leadership is merely using sanctions relief to wait out the current administration. They fear the released assets will eventually fund regional instability. Regional realists in Israel and Saudi Arabia share this concern, fearing the U.S. is gradually abandoning its role as the primary guarantor of stability. To them, the pivot to Asia looks like a retreat from long-standing security commitments that have defined the last half-century. The risk of spoilers remains the most immediate threat to this fragile regional peace. Non-state actors or internal hardliners could easily launch a provocation designed to collapse the agreement. If a militia rocket finds a target or a clandestine enrichment facility is discovered, the political pressure to respond with force would be immense. Such a scenario would end the ceasefire and likely trigger a broader conflict, dragging the U.S. back into the forever wars it seeks to escape. Strategic vulnerabilities also exist. If China or Russia fills the security vacuum left by a reduced American presence, Washington could find its global influence diminished. This power vacuum is a risk the Pentagon must balance against the benefits of redeployment to the Pacific theater, where the stakes for global hegemony are significantly higher. Looking ahead, a permanent peace requires benchmarks that currently seem distant. It would require settlements on ballistic missile proliferation and the proxy wars in Yemen and Syria. For now, the ceasefire represents a historic gamble. It is a bet that pragmatism can outweigh decades of animosity, and that the United States can successfully redefine its global footprint. Whether this is remembered as a masterstroke of diplomacy, facilitated by the persistence of Oman and Qatar, or a fleeting moment of calm remains to be seen. The durability of the deal through the upcoming election cycle will be the ultimate test. This ceasefire is not a final end to hostilities, but a delicate and precarious beginning for a reimagined American future, where focus shifts from the deserts of the Middle East to the vast challenges of the 21st century and long-term stability.